Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Cloud Forensic Investigations, a practical guide to digital forensics. This is the second session of our CHFI series with Bennie Cleveland. I'm Kainaz Baria, and I'll be your host for the day. If you have missed the first session of this CHFI series, you can find the link to watch them shared in the chat section. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen-only mode and will last for an hour, out of which the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Now about our speaker, Bennie L. Cleveland. Bennie is a distinguished cybersecurity leader with over 2 decades of experience in cyber incident management, enterprise security, and risk management, holding certifications such as CHFI, CCISO, CISM, CISA, CRISC, and CIPM. Bennie has demonstrated exemplary leadership in incident response, forensics, and threat intelligence. Currently serving as the AVP of Cyber Incident Management at the Chubb, he specializes in identifying high-risk vulnerabilities and mitigating ransomware. Bennie has a proven track record of accelerating incident resolution and enhancing business continuity. He is also a cybersecurity adjunct at Valley Forge Military Academy and College, where he teaches digital forensics. His strategic oversight ensures robust compliance and comprehensive security measures. So without any further delay, I would like to hand over the session to you, Bennie.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you so much for joining this session on cloud forensics. And thank you to everyone who attended our last session, which was on our mobile forensics perspectives. We talked about an advanced guide to digital forensics. So I really appreciate those who did participate. I have over 20 years of specialized experience in cybersecurity, focused in the areas of incident response, digital forensics, and risk management. Along the way, I have contributed to various projects in a vast and variety of organizations, including organizations like Dell SecureWorks, AstraZeneca, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Campbell's, and also Chubb. Right now, I do lead incident investigations, focusing on aligning strategies with regulatory compliance and developing detailed incident response protocols. As alluded before, I am a certified computer hacking forensic investigator, and I also hold several certifications in risk management and information security governance. And my approach is always rooted in industry best practices. And so over the years, I've built more than 100 security programs from the ground up, covering critical areas in incident response, risk management, and vulnerability management, along with business continuity. So this includes creating security policies, incident handling procedures for Fortune 50, 100, and 500 companies. So with that being said, let's begin by walking through today's agenda. We certainly want to talk a lot about cloud forensics. We want to have a brief introduction. So we'll talk about the digital landscape and defining what makes cloud investigations unique compared to traditional forensic approaches. We then want to get into the service level agreements and their critical role in cloud forensics. We really want to get into how the SLAs define the level of service expected from cloud service providers, including response times, data access provisions, and also their responsibilities during any investigation. We then will explore best practices tailored for cloud-based investigations. This will include guidelines for planning, execution, and ensuring compliance with legal and regulatory standards throughout the forensic process. And then we'll move on to practical techniques for data collection and preservation in the cloud. This section will cover methods to acquire evidence securely, including handling volatile data and using specialized tools for cloud environments. And then from there, we'll talk about what is a successful investigation in the cloud, right? What does that look like? We'll also discuss strategies for building strong relationships with providers, understanding shared responsibilities and their models, and how do we overcome challenges accessing cloud stored data. And then we'll wrap up with the main part of the presentation with a look at future. What is the future of cloud forensics with AI at the point of that? We'll discuss emerging trends such as impact of artificial intelligence, with also the use of automation in the forensic process. And then last, we'll conclude with a short Q&A, and this will give opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into any topics that you would like to explore for future clarity. So now that we've covered the agenda, let's move into our first topic, which is cloud forensics. And so naturally, cloud forensics involves applying digital forensic principles to cloud environments. This is where data is often distributed across multiple servers and managed by third-party providers. This approach requires a deep understanding of cloud infrastructure and its unique challenges. Let's explore the 4 core components that define cloud forensics, and that is going to be cloud infrastructure, data breach, remote investigations, and multi-tenancy. So the first topic is cloud infrastructure, right? So cloud services come in 3 models: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Each one gives us a unique level of control over the data. For instance, in infrastructure as a service, we focus on things like virtual machines and storage, whereas software as a service, we'll be looking at the user activity logs, such as from applications like Office 365 or Google Workspace. So depending on the cloud model, our forensic approach can vary quite a bit. Our next is data breach, right? So data breaches are one of the most common cases we handle in cloud forensics. This is when unauthorized access, like a hacker getting into the cloud database, we need to act pretty fast. So the first step is analyzing the logs to track the breach, figure out which credentials were compromised, and assess the extent of the damage. For example, if sensitive customer data stored in the AWS S3 bucket is accessed, we will be reviewing the access log, network traffic, and API calls to piece together what actually happened and understand how much data was actually exposed. The next would be our remote investigation, okay? Unlike traditional forensics, cloud investigations are often done remotely. We don't need to be on site. Instead, we use cloud management interfaces and APIs provided by the cloud provider. And so we will be using tools like AWS CloudTrail and Azure Monitor to help us collect evidence without touching the hardware itself. Remote access is much faster and allows us to gather data from multiple regions, which is a huge advantage in cloud forensics. But there is yet another layer of complex nature when it comes to cloud environments, and that's multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy means that multiple clients share the same infrastructure in the cloud. This can make forensics tricky because we have to separate the data of different clients. It's also important to ensure we access only the relevant data without violating another tenant's privacy. Okay, so this is where we will be working with cloud providers to set strict access controls and make sure that we actually are adhering to them. So now that we've covered these key components, let's move on to service level agreements and how they come into play in any and all cloud investigations. So service level agreements, or SLAs, are fundamental documents that outline the terms of service between a cloud provider and its customers. In cloud forensics, understanding SLAs is crucial because they typically define the framework for data that's being accessed, log retention, and compliance requirements. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the SLAs and the impact in any forensic investigations. So the first is our service level agreement overview, right? And these are key documents that will be defining the terms of service between a cloud provider and its customer. In cloud forensics, SLAs are essential because they establish the rules for the data that's being accessed, log retention, and compliance requirements. Understanding these terms help us guide our investigations, okay? So let's look at data rights, right? So this is probably the next key component here. So we need to define the data logs, right? We need to look at the metadata we can access during any investigation that's pertaining to the cloud. These rights specify the permissions granted to the customer and also by the extension to the forensic team. So it's vital to understand these work limits and understand any unauthorized access that could lead to any legal issues. For example, in an infrastructure as a service environment, the SLA might allow us access to our virtual machine log, but restrict access to underlying hardware data. In such cases, we will need to work with the cloud service provider to access additional data. And typically at this point, we would bring in our legal team if necessary. So with data access clarified, let's move on to another key component within the SLA, and that's log retention. Log retention in SLA dictates how long logs can be stored by the cloud provider. This is very important for any forensic investigation because of short retention periods could limit our ability to gather critical historical data. For example, AWS CloudTrail logs are typically kept for 90 days unless extended by a specific configuration. As a forensic investigator, we need to act fast or negotiate extended access to ensure we don't lose important logs during our investigation. Now, when it comes to compliance obligations, SLAs also outline certain obligations which require adherence to laws and regulations like GDPR, CCPA, and HIPAA. These regulations typically affect how we handle, store, and access data during any investigation. For example, GDPR imposes strict guidelines on accessing personal data, impacting how we collect and share forensic evidence. And so knowing these compliance obligations ensures that we are in line with both legal standards and also with the contractual agreements within the SLA. In summary, these SLA components, which includes the data access rights, log retention policies, and compliance obligations, create a structured framework that shapes how we approach cloud forensics. So let's now move on to best practices for adapting forensic investigations to different cloud environments. Okay. To conduct effective forensic investigations in cloud environments, we need to tailor our strategies based on the specific cloud service model: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Each model offers different data access and presents unique challenges. Let's go through these best practices for each, focusing on the techniques that give us the most reliable evidence. And so when we tailor our approach, we typically understand which model that has to be done due to the SLA, okay? But when we look at infrastructure as a service, our main focus is analyzing virtual machines, right? How do we examine network traffic? How do we conduct storage forensics? And so we use provider-specific tools like AWS CloudTrail and Azure Monitor to access VM snapshots and logs. The virtual machine analysis helps us understand the state of the system, which will help us identify running processes and recover potential evidence. Network traffic forensics gives us the insights into user activities, while storage forensics involves examining virtual disks to uncover data artifacts to reconstruct that event. Let's move on to platform as a service. The main sources of evidence in platform as a service are application logs, database transactions, and API calls. Since platform as a service hosts applications and services, we need to examine these logs to understand user interactions and detect any unauthorized access. We also have to analyze database activity for suspicious queries in API logs to trace actions taken by a user or the attacker. And so this gives us a detailed insight into the application layer, helping us pinpoint any anomaly and uncover critical evidence. And then our last structure is software as a service. Within software as a service environments, forensic investigations rely heavily on user activity logs and audit trails. Applications like Office 365 and Salesforce offer comprehensive logging features that track user actions such as file access, modifications, and admin changes. By reviewing these logs, we can identify unauthorized actions, compromised accounts, and establish a timeline of events, helping us detect insider threats and track suspicious behavior, okay? So we ensure that all three of these models are effective, right, through any cloud service model. So now let's look at the practical techniques for data collection. To conduct a thorough investigation in a cloud environment, we need to specialize techniques for our data collection and preservation. This will ensure that we capture all relevant evidence and while maintaining its integrity. Let's walk through 3 techniques, which will be capturing volatile data, collecting logs, and ensuring data integrity. So in regards to capturing volatile data, first, let's just take a step back. This is going to refer to the temporary information like active network connections and RAM contents, which can disappear if the system is powered off or altered. So to capture this data, we need to use a cloud-native tool like AWS EC2, Memory Forensics, or Google Cloud Snapshot functionality. By collecting this data in real time, we can preserve crucial details about the system state, such as running processes and open connections. This is key to understanding system behavior during any incident. Logs are also essential in cloud forensics, right? They provide a record of activities and events within the cloud environment. We collect these access logs through API logs and also event logs from tools like AWS CloudTrail and Azure Monitor, and also Google Cloud Logging. These logs help us to identify unauthorized actions, trace an attacker's steps, and also understand the methods that they actually use. For example, API logs show specific commands executed, while access logs can highlight any unusual login attempts from any unexpected location. We also want to ensure that our data integrity has not been compromised, right? So it's critical to ensure that collected evidence remains unaltered and legally defensible. We use methods like write blockers and generate cryptographic hash values like MD5, SHA-256 to verify that the data's integrity has not changed. Hashing creates a unique digital fingerprint of the evidence, allowing us to prove that it hasn't been tampered with. This is essential for building a reliable chain of custody and ensuring that any admissible information will kind of move forward in legal proceedings. With these practical techniques, capturing volatile data, collecting logs, and ensuring data integrity, we can effectively gather and preserve critical evidence in cloud environments. Next, we'll be exploring how we can collaborate with the cloud service providers that enhance our investigative efforts. In regards to our cloud service providers, it's crucial for effective cloud forensic investigations. Whether we're working with AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, or others, understanding the relationship between the CSP and the forensic team is key for gathering evidence efficiently and also in compliance with legal standards. Let's walk through 5 essential aspects of this collaboration with CSPs. So CSPs, forensic investigations, and legal challenges, the shared responsibility model, and the communication channels. So the first is our cloud service providers, right? And so when we say cloud service providers, what do we really mean, right? So AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, just to name a few, which offer a variety of services and tools that can help our complicated or investigations easier to understand. So in other words, these cloud providers, they can help us understand what's actually going on within our environment, even if we don't have a cloud forensics team on site. So for example, AWS CloudTrail provides comprehensive logs for API calls, while Azure Monitor tracks system activities. So each provider has its own set of tools and capabilities. Knowing these helps us tailor our forensic approach to each cloud environment. And so one thing to take away here is that a lot of organizations may not have a forensic team. And so we will be relying heavily on the cloud provider to provide a lot of the log capabilities. The next is our forensic investigations. And so this is where cloud forensics involves accessing logs, metadata, and other critical data from the CSP's infrastructure. And so we use specialized tools to analyze user activities, to track unauthorized access, and also to gather digital evidence. For example, we might retrieve API call logs, login histories, or virtual machine snapshots to understand what happened during the actual incident, like unauthorized access or a data breach. However, accessing this data isn't always straightforward due to the legal and compliance challenges. And so when it comes to the legal and compliance challenges, there are several hurdles that are significant when working with CSPs. So in regards to that, we have regulations like GDPR and CCPA, which impose strict requirements on how data is actually accessed and handled. For example, retrieving user data without proper authorization can violate privacy laws. Partnering with the CSP's legal and compliance teams is essential to navigate these challenges, ensuring that we adhere to data privacy laws and meet international regulations. While legal considerations are important, understanding the shared responsibility model between the CSP and the customer is not just critical, it's crucial. And so the shared responsibility model defines which aspects of security are being handled by the CSP. and which are the customer's responsibility. For example, the CSP takes care of infrastructure security, including physical data center security, while the customer manages data security, user permissions, and application security. This model ensures clarity during investigations and helps avoid confusion about roles. And so lastly, effective collaboration depends on maintaining clear communication channels. Establishing strong communication channels with the CSP is key. This includes having designated points of contact, clear escalation procedures, and preferred response protocols. For instance, if we need a specific user activity log, a direct line to the CSP's incident response team can expedite the process and reduce delays in gathering evidence. So in conclusion, successful collaboration with the CSP is paramount, right? Through the use of their tools, addressing legal challenges, understanding shared responsibilities, and maintaining strong communication creates a solid foundation for effective cloud forensic investigations. So let's now discuss how we can align these efforts with industry best practices and enhance the investigation outcome. As we wrap up this presentation, it's clear that cloud forensics is an evolving field that requires continuous adaptation and collaboration. Let's quickly review what we've covered and then explore the emerging trends in shaping the future of cloud forensic investigations. So let's let's recap the importance of collaborative investigations in forensic cloud forensics. And so successful cloud forensic investigations rely on strong collaboration between investigators and cloud service providers. By leveraging the CSP's expertise and built-in tools, we can streamline the collection and analysis of evidence. Clear communication and understanding the shared responsibility model are crucial for overcoming data access and compliance challenges, making investigations more efficient and thorough. While collaboration is essential, we also need to evolve our methods and tools to keep up to date with new technologies. So let's explore how forensic methodologies are adapting. So successful cloud forensic rely, I'm sorry here. To stay ahead with forensic practitioners must continuously adapt to the fast changing cloud landscape. So this is going to include adapting new tools, enhancing data analysis techniques, and improving evidence preservation. For example, machine learning, right? And this is being integrated into forensic tools, allowing for more accurate detection for anomalies and faster identification of critical evidence. One challenge that we're facing as the cloud landscape is changing is the rise of serverless computing, which requires a shift into our traditional forensic approach. Now, serverless computing introduces complexities in cloud forensics. In serverless environments, there's unique functions that replace traditional virtual machines, meaning data retention is shorter and visibility into the infrastructure is limited. Forensic investigators must rely more on the API logs and cloud-native monitoring tools and capture real-time data. Developing specialized techniques for serverless forensics will be crucial as more organizations move to this model. Let's look at another emerging trend, the increasing use of containerization technology. With the rise of containers through platforms like Docker and Kubernetes, forensic investigations have become more complex. Containers are lightweight, easy spun up or terminated, which makes it harder to capture a snapshot of the system state. Forensic teams now focus on analyzing container images, runtime logs, and orchestration data to understand what's happening within these environments. Specialized tools for container forensics helps us to address these challenges effectively. So lastly, let's consider edge computing and its impact on cloud forensics. Edge computing involves processing data closer to its source at the network edge rather than the centralized data centers. While this improves data latency and performance, it also spreads data across many smaller nodes, making evidence collection more complex. Investigators must develop innovative techniques for real-time monitoring and decentralized analysis to capture and also to analyze data from the edge devices. So in conclusion, the future of cloud forensics will require adaptability, continuous learning, and innovative solutions to keep pace with these evolving technologies. To wrap up, we've covered the key components of cloud forensics, discussed best practices for investigations, and also explored practical techniques. As we move forward, trends like serverless forensics, container forensics, and edge computing will continue to shape the future of cloud forensics. So I hope this session has given you valuable insights. Now I'm open to any questions that you may have. And I will turn it back over to our host.
Thank you very much, Benny, for delivering such an insightful and informative session. We found the webinar very engaging and hope it was valuable for you as well. Before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that this session is in sync with EC Council's Certified Hacking Forensic Investigator, that is CHFI program. EC Council's Certified Hacking Forensics Program, CHFI certification, is an ANSI accredited lab-focused program offering comprehensive and vendor-neutral training in digital forensics. Participants will learn to conduct computer forensic investigations using innovative digital forensic techniques and tools. The course covers the knowledge and skills that cybersecurity professionals need to analyze complex security threats. Certification holders will be able to help thwart cyber attacks by investigating, recording, and reporting cybercrime. EC Council's CHFI program is mapped to crucial cyber forensic job roles. According to LinkedIn 2024, it lists over 3,600 plus digital forensics job opening worldwide. And according to PayScale 2024, it lists an average annual salary of US $111,000 for CHFI credit certified professionals in the United States. If you're interested to know more, please participate in the poll being conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we'll reach out to you. So Benny, we'll start with the question and answers.
Okay.
Training and expertise. How important is specialized training for forensic investigators in cloud technologies, and what resources are available for professionals looking to enhance their skills in this area?
Excellent question. So first part of the question, is training important? Absolutely. I can't stress it enough. I do think the CHFI has enabled me to understand investigation a little bit better from a broad perspective. There's also several other trainings out there, but as far as the CHFI, I would highly recommend to get trained and certified so you're able to kind of tackle a lot of these complex investigations.
That's great. We'll go on with the next one. Forensic standards. What standardized framework exists for conducting digital forensics in cloud environment, and how can these frameworks improve the consistency and reliability of investigations?
So there's several frameworks within NIST and ISO, and some overlap. We look at 61, 861, we look at some of the risk management that kind of talk a little bit about the cloud. Also within ISO, we do see that as well. So there's several frameworks. I won't list them all here. That kind of give us a good approach. We also see some within techniques within the MITRE ATT&CK framework of how to deal with various standards or complex investigations. So yeah, you would certainly have to research depending on the unique case that you're in, the SLAs, of course. So there's typically a collaboration of several standards that kind of come to mind, and also with the SLA to see which approach will work best for that unique case.
That's great. Regarding logs and logs policy, is there any reliable approach that can be followed to manage log on-premise or cloud services?
Great question. Yes, this is going to really be predicated on your log retention policy. I have seen this in the past where short log retention, especially if you're doing like a CloudTrail log or some type of S3 bucket log, or if you don't have access to it, right, because we're only a week or 30 days, you're going to be limited in what you really can actually examine. So really, it's going to come down to the log retention policy of the organization.
Okay, so we move on to the next one. I had an incident with AWS on my RDS, which the column removed with its data from my database. I asked them to justify that, but they did nothing. What should I do in such a horrible situation?
Wow, that is a horrible situation. So this is where, when we talked about the SLA agreement, roles and responsibilities within that SLA, what is the intricate detail in the SLA? Who is responsible for discovering that data, right? If they're not responding, and I'm assuming they're talking about the cloud service provider. If the cloud service provider is not responding, this is where we're looking at the SLA. There may be a breach of services that may have to be reviewed with the legal team, especially if they're not responding. I'm almost sure that there's a clause in the service level agreement that speaks to the responsibility of the cloud service provider in communications, right? What is the expected outcome if we have a very unique case like this? And so I would certainly say review that SLA with the legal team, and review the clauses in the SLA. There should be some verbiage that speaks to expectation as far as communication and who's responsible for expected outcomes.
What are the best open source tools that can be used for cloud digital forensics?
Open source tools. It really depends on the investigation. You know, I'm an AWS person. I'm a Linux person, right? It really depends on the environment. It really does, because there's certain environments where you can use Axiom, right? You can also use Celebrite for some. There's also cases where you can use an autopsy, right? But again, it really depends on the investigation and the file structure that you're trying to extract in the cloud, because just because it's cloud, you probably will still use some of your current techniques. But we're really relying on that cloud service provider. So we may not be able to use some of our tools. Now, those are not open sourced. Some are. Keep in mind, for admissible information in court, you should be using commercial tools, not open source. They won't stand up in court. So again, it's going to come down to the complexity of that investigation, and typically in the SLA, they may also speak to tools that have been approved, right? So that I'm looking at it from a more broader perspective, but that would probably be the best approach.
Could you suggest playbooks for conducting cloud forensic investigations?
Absolutely. I'm a strong proponent on playbooks. In fact, not having a playbook shows that the forensic team or security team is liable for mistake or error. And typically, if you don't have a playbook, we don't really know the outcome. The playbooks kind of give us the outcome. And if you're modeling a forensic process, right, then our leadership team, right, or our board or our stakeholders, they also may want to understand that process. And again, this is a proactive approach, right? We want to make sure that everybody understands that we have that incident or that breach handled. So having a playbook is paramount, not only for a cloud investigation, but for any forensic investigation.
AWS does not allow audit and forensic on their cloud. How can we achieve the full investigation and admissible to court or presentable, trustworthy to authorities?
Great question. So this is where understanding the jurisdiction of the actual attack or investigation relies in. So if this is not on US soil, we will be relying on either that forensic team that's handling this or that cloud provider that actually is responsible for that investigation itself. So with that being said, we would typically rely heavily on that cloud provider, and also that legal team, right? There's a lot of jurisdictional laws and regulations, especially if this is in EU, for example, they probably will be using DORA, right, which is a huge compliance policy that's out there. And so there's a lot of complexities that would have to be understood. If this is not something that we can handle, we now have to look at the SLA, we have to look at the statement of work, perhaps with that provider, right? And we also have to work with the legal team to understand what is the best approach, especially if we're not able to touch any information or we're relying heavily on a different team or another provider or a vendor.
What tools and techniques are considered essential for cloud forensic investigations?
So commercial, again, as I alluded before, there's several tools from a commercial professional environment that I highly recommend. Celebrite and Axiom are my go-tos for any investigation. You also have managed service providers like CrowdStrike who also have that ability to kind of parse data from a cloud resource. They have several sensors. You also have Sentinel. You have Microsoft Sentinel, and there's many others that are also approved tools to render data for your investigation. But again, my approach, I also come from best practices, so I'm always looking at commercialized tools that will be approved. Celebrite and Axiom, in case the list kind of goes on from there. Really any one of those top 3 tools I will highly recommend for any cloud investigation. Keep in mind that you will typically need to have the sensor on that endpoint or on that device to parse the data. So just keep that in mind.
How difficult and challenging in cloud forensic investigation, and what are the best tools to use?
Same thing. Really, it's going to be the same tools, right? So I think the question was how easy is it to get the information? It's pretty easy. Again, if we're talking about cloud resources, we're really talking about the logs. We're talking about the API, right? We're talking about a process in the cloud. Once we're able to render that information, we can pull that data back into one of the tools that I just alluded to do a deeper investigation.
Can you please provide any cloud-based solutions to perform digital investigations on cloud logs? And also, can it be integrated with my on-prem?
Yeah, so same thing. What I'm hearing a lot of are questions basically on the tools and also on the steps to use the tool. So again, that will probably take a more deeper approach to in creating a playbook for that specific environment. But typically, you would be saving that log file or uploading that log file into Axiom, right? And at that point, you would actually be able to see some of the traces or footprint of that log. We will be able to pull out anomalies. And again, depending on the investigation or from the legal team, there will probably be specific information that they're looking for, right? Or if there's data that's been compromised in the cloud, it's the same way that we would look at this from a regular forensic investigation, right? So, for example, if we're looking for metadata on a particular pharmaceutical file, right? It's 6 months old, right? So we saw this 6 months ago. It's in the cloud, right? We will be basically wrapping or zipping up that file, parsing that file up from, maybe it's like a cloud trail log, and then basically uploading it into Axiom, right? And we can examine a little bit deeper of what that file looks like.
Okay. Which one is the best commercial tool to cover cloud forensic investigation scope?
You know, I honestly don't have I mean, I love Axiom, and that's just because to me, I love the GUIs in Axiom. In case is probably number 2, and then number 3, I would probably say Celebrate, especially when we're talking about mobile forensics. Most of those tools or platforms, they're cloud-based anyway, right? So it's just easier to use one of those 3. So no particular order, but I would say those 3 would probably be my premier choice to use: Axiom, Celebrate, and Encase.
What are the most critical steps organizations can take to ensure data integrity and chain of custody when collecting and analyzing evidence in cloud environments? And how can they ensure compliance with legal and regulatory requirements?
Yeah, so great question, by the way. So first, the biggest component is roles and responsibilities. Most organizations may be on a need to know policy. So the forensic teams may be limited as to what data that they actually can see or handle. And then part 2, I think the question was more or less, what are the proper steps? Is that what the second part of the question was asking? I think
The
the second
second
part of the
part is
question.
how can they ensure compliance with legal and regulatory requirements?
Yeah, okay. So as far as the compliance, that should already be understood in the SLA. So for example, if this is US based, there may be investigation across seas. So now we're looking at GDPR. We're looking at specific articles within GDPR. So again, that should already be spelled out before we even begin the investigation. This is typically during the documentation review, where senior leadership will sign off in regards to the investigation, what actually will take place, what is the expected outcome, any compliance concerns, and then so that should already be understood before the investigation begins, right? So if this is HIPAA, right, we're dealing with a hospital, all right, and we're talking about a cloud repository dealing with a hospital, that leadership would more than likely already have to have signed off on us handling that data, and basically gives us a green pass to deal with that data. Another level is signing an NDA, right? Typically, the vendor will sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, to just bring a level of confidence, that an assurance rather, where that vendor will handle the data, sensitive data, to the best of their ability and legally. So.
In what situation do we need data forensics? Can you give any examples?
So we need data forensics, simply for the mere fact that it goes in deeper, right? Your investigations will discover more granular data, more information on a investigation. So for example, let's just say we found malicious information on a particular employee at your company, right? We may only get an alert, right, at the SIM level, right? So they're probably going to have a SIM that will alert of, some type of DOP alert, something triggers, data has been exposed, right? We don't really know what that data is, right? So a forensic investigation will discover when, why, and how that data was actually exfiltrated from A to B, what the data was, is the data sensitive, right? And what's the level of criticality of the data, right? So that's where the forensics component comes in. Now, some organizations are able to do all of that in one. Some are not as granular as others. But just keep in mind that forensics will expose everything, right? So we'll understand the type of data, where the data came from, the intended recipient of that data, how long it's been in that particular repository, the sensitivity of the data, when the data was uploaded, right? Who the data was shared with, things like that, right? We're able to get more granular as far as where the data is actually going and how that data is being perceived.
We'll go with the last two questions for the day. There are too many questions that are coming up, Benny, but we'll have to go for the last two questions. Is there
Okay.
any possible way to track my file or any unauthorized way of copying or use, such redistribution or so on?
So I think the question is asking, is there a way to track data? Is that what the
Is
question
there
is
any
asking?
possible way to track my file for any unauthorized copying use, such as redistribution and so on?
That would be basically a configuration concern, right? There's several tools that can track the whereabouts of any file. And if you think about a DLP solution, especially with the emergence of AI, it's certainly doable. But again, we have to look at the legality of doing that. Now we're looking at corporate policies, right? Is that legal? Is that going against our policy? But to answer the question, yes. There are several ways to track, but keep in mind there's several AI DLP tools that would actually enable that to happen, right? One that comes to mind is Proofpoint that actually do have a variant to track files, right? And you actually get up alerts to see when that actually happens. So it really depends on the organization's policy, what's applicable to the organization and what's not.
Okay, we'll go with the last one. During incident response, planning, and testing, is it necessary to conduct cloud forensic? At what extent?
Great question. Yes, and yes. I look at cloud forensics a little bit differently than some other experts in the field. I would highly recommend you always do cloud forensics, at least from a minimal perspective. What comes out of cloud forensics is gathering more information, right? Gathering practical granular data. And so it can't hurt you, it only can help you. Now, again, if we're under a time crunch, right? This is when we go above and beyond, right? If we're not in a time crunch, I certainly would try to get as much information as possible. Now, what this will do is also help us create a validated report. After all investigations, you should be creating a forensics report. In that report, it'll highlight the whole investigation. So I'm more or less from best practices. I always a strong proponent of audit trail. So for me, I always want to document everything as much as possible.
Thank you to our wonderful speaker, Benny, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and the knowledge that you shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we're looking for more and more sessions with you. Before we conclude the webinar, Benny, would you like to give a short message to the audiences?
Yes, I just want to say thank you all for your time and attention today. A little bit shorter than the other sessions, but I hope that this was a valuable session for you, where we talked about cloud forensics, service level agreements, best practices, and also practical techniques for data collection and collaboration in our cloud service providers. I'm also excited to announce that our upcoming session on December 18th will be covering anti-forensic tactics being exposed. And also we'll talk about the techniques and countermeasures in digital forensics. So a lot of the questions that were talked about were kind of hit home with a lot of those techniques in that session. And we'll be diving how anti-forensics techniques are used to evade detection and how we can counteract them in forensic investigations. So I hope you all will join me on December 18th, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Bennie. Thank you, Bennie.
Thank you, everybody.